Division, hate, anger, stress. Us versus them. Where do we draw the line? Hey guys, this week we've been talking about division in our lives and the way that taking sides divides us. It seems like lately everything is engineered to divide us. Even hanging out with friends becomes debate. Dinner with family becomes uncomfortable. Social media is full of anger and hate and conflict. When did something as simple as protecting yourself and others become a political issue? And here in about a week and a half, we're going to be finishing up voting on our country's leaders. Everybody's got opinions on that, strong opinions, and they really want people to agree with them. And not everybody does. What are we going to do about it? Lately, we've been taking this idea that taking sides only divides people. That instead of being side takers, we should be peacemakers. I want to give you a story from the life of Jesus, something that he taught his followers when they asked him a relevant question about taking sides. One day, an expert in the religious law came to Jesus and he said, "Jesus, teacher, what must I do to inherit eternal life?" Jesus kind of looked at the man, and I think he might have smiled a little bit. He says, "Well, you're an expert. What does the law say? How do you understand what has been written in the scriptures?" And the guy says, "Well, the scripture says, love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your strength, and with all your mind." Jesus said, "Okay, do this, and you will live." Go ahead, you already know the answer. Go ahead and do it. But he wasn't satisfied with that. The guy said, "Okay, but what does it mean? How do I show that I love God with everything that I am?" Well, Jesus is trying to teach him that you can't be right with God if you're wrong with others. Right? If you can't show love to the people that God has created, then you can't show love to God himself. Right? Jesus added this extra bit. He says the second most important commandment, the one that is just like the first, is love your neighbor as yourself. Not just to love God with all that you are, but to love your neighbor as yourself. Now the guy is listening to Jesus, and man, love for God seems really easy. Love for God is something that anybody can say that they do. It doesn't really require any sort of effort, just a belief. Just the right headspace to say, yes, I love God. But loving your neighbor, that's a bit of a tall order. Jesus said, love your neighbor, but he also said, love your enemies. And sometimes those can be the same people. So this guy, he has a problem. He knows what Jesus is saying. He knows what he's being told to do, but he's trying to get out of it. Right? He's a lawyer, so he's trying to finesse the situation and see what he can get away with. So he says, well, Jesus, if I'm supposed to love my neighbor, who is my neighbor? What qualifies as a neighbor? Right? In English, we just use the word neighbor often to mean the people who live next to us or the people who live on the same street as us. Sometimes it means the people who live in our same town or community. But you wouldn't say that someone who lives all the way across the state or all the way across the country or halfway around the globe is your neighbor. We don't use the word in that sense in the English language. And so here's this man who's asking Jesus, who is my neighbor? And rather than just giving him an answer, Jesus tells a story. See, Jesus was the kind of person who often when you would ask him for a straight answer, he would tell a story. I think he felt that we needed to understand how these answers get put into practice. We needed to understand the impact that they would have on the real world. So when Jesus wanted to answer this question, he told a story. He said, there was once a man who was traveling to Jericho. He was going from Jerusalem down to Jericho. Now, you and I, we don't automatically assume anything about that. But the people who heard that story, they would have understood the place where this guy is traveling, he's traveling through some bad parts, right? He's going to travel through a dangerous area. Jerusalem was not dangerous, neither was Jericho. The cities were safe, but the road between them was not. The road went down a mountain and it went through some areas where it was hard to see what was up ahead. It was a very easy place for bad people to hide, to lay in wait, to ambush and rob and kill. So it was a dangerous place, especially to go alone. So when Jesus says there's this man traveling from Jerusalem down to Jericho, he's setting up this story. Everyone understands he's taking a risk. So the man is traveling, and while he's traveling, he gets jumped. Right? Some robbers come out. They beat him to within an inch of his life. They take everything from him. All of his possessions, his horse or his donkey, whatever he's riding on, even the clothes off his back. Like I said, they beat him, they leave him bleeding and dying by the side of the road. But while he's lying there, two people come by. The first is a priest, someone who serves in the temple in Jerusalem. Right? The priests are the ones who speak to God on behalf of the people. The second person who passes by is a Levite. They're more like servants in the temple. They were important people. They had important jobs. They weren't priests, but they were still pretty important. I'm sure the people listening to this story would think, all right, one of these guys is going to help. Have you ever found yourself in the situation where you're talking to somebody and you think to yourself, I really don't want to say anything bad about this person. I don't want to say anything. I don't want to bash people. I don't want to hate on people. But sometimes I just really got something I got to say. Right? We can't always not stand for truth just so that we don't hurt someone's feelings. Okay? These priests, these Levites in the story, these were not good people. Right? We can't dance around that. They were so self-absorbed and so concerned with their own day-to-day life that they couldn't step out and help someone. Now, with a little bit of context, we understand why they made that decision. It wasn't just because they couldn't be bothered or they didn't have time. This man is lying on the side of the road. He's nearly dead. And priests and Levites, they had very specific rules. If a priest or a Levite were to have come into contact with a dead body, with the body of someone who died, they would be unable to do their job for at least several days. It was part of the sort of ceremonial cleanliness that they practiced. And it would be a huge pain in the butt. It would be a massive inconvenience for them to go and they would have to wash and they would have to stay in isolation. We all kind of understand how that works now. So the priests, it wasn't just that they didn't have time, but they really didn't have time. It would have been a bigger deal if this guy had died than if they just left him. So they have a problem. Because how do we show love to people when we can't take the time? I think the answer is we can't. Love is time. Love is never passive. It's always in action. You can't just walk past someone and feel sorry for them. That's not love. Jesus went on to say, after the Jesus went on to say, after the priest and the Levite had gone by, a despised Samaritan came past. Right? Not just a Samaritan, a despised Samaritan. The Samaritans were the people that the Jewish people would not even speak to. They wouldn't even pass them on the road. Right? They were so antagonistic. They hated each other so much. Believe it or not, they worshiped the same God. But they were at odds with how that worship was to take place. Now, the Samaritans were very passionate about worshiping God, but they worshipped on a particular mountain. They had a building up on top of the mountain that they would go to, and they would worship God on the mountain. The Jewish people were down in Jerusalem, and they had their temple. And they said that if you're not at the temple, then you're not doing it properly. And to be perfectly honest, according to the Old Testament rules, the Jewish people were right. They were supposed to be worshiping at the temple. This mountain that the Samaritans had chosen was just something that they had chosen. But when Jesus came around, that whole way of thinking of there's only one way to worship God, that was all about to die. So it didn't really matter. And Jesus is using this guy, this Samaritan, to show people that it doesn't matter who you are as long as you have love. The Samaritan came along, he saw the man, and he went and he helped him. Now I want you to picture two people in your mind. I want you to picture an old white guy in a MAGA hat. And now I want you to picture a transgender black woman wearing a defund the police t-shirt. How many lines can you draw that separate those two people? Just from the description that I gave, almost every word that I use to describe them is also a line that can be drawn to divide them. We are so quick to define people, to draw lines, to divide. See, back then people loved drawing lines about who was in and who was out, and the same is true today. Okay? We are always looking for ways to divide, but Jesus was not about that. Jesus was the one who stood in the middle. Right? He found the gap between people, and he stood there, trying to bridge between people, to draw them together. See, real love, the kind of love that Jesus had, it isn't passive, it takes action. It goes the extra mile. See, this Samaritan man, not only did he stop and help the injured man, not only did he pick him up and bandage his wounds and clean them up, not only did he pick him up and he put him on his own donkey, the Samaritan man walked the rest of the journey so that his donkey could carry the injured man. He carried him all the way to Jericho, where he took him to an inn. And here's where he goes the extra mile. He doesn't just take him somewhere where he can be cared for. He takes him there. He says, look after this man, get him healthy again. Here's some money. I'm going to pay for it. And when I come back, I'll settle up. If it costs more than what I have, when I come back, I'm good for the rest. I'll pay for it all. Now, you might think that it would be a great deed to drive someone to the hospital when they need to go because they can't afford an ambulance, right? Or, to help somebody who's sick, take them to the doctor. But not only drive them, but to pay for it, to pay their hospital bill, that's the extra mile. That's the kind of love that Jesus is talking about. Like, I'm going to sacrifice what's mine, not just for somebody who's close to me, but for anybody who has a need. That's the kind of love that Jesus is talking about. This is a sort of action-oriented love. Love is not just a feeling, the way Jesus describes it. It's not just something that we think about. It's not just something that we feel. Right? It's something that we do. It's a way that we live. Love is the time that we take and the action behind it. I mean, you can be friends with someone. You can feel affection or devotion for someone. You can feel connected to them. But if you don't take the time to do something for them, to give up something of yourself so that that person can benefit, then it's not love. Real love gives. So Jesus ends his story. He looks at the crowd and he asks them, okay, out of all the people in the story, who was the neighbor to the man who was injured? And the guy who was asking the question, the expert in the law, he's so uncomfortable about the Samaritan that he can't even name him. He can't even say the Samaritan. All he says is, the one who had mercy on him. The one who loved him. The one who showed love to him. He was so embarrassed, he couldn't bring himself to even say the Samaritan. But even in his uncomfortableness, he understood. The man wanted to know what it meant to be a neighbor so that he would be justified in not showing love to people he didn't think deserved it. And Jesus turned it on his head and said, the only way you can show love is to people who don't deserve it. The only way you can show love is to be a neighbor. Don't worry about who is your neighbor. You go and be a neighbor to everyone and see what happens. Jesus had this habit of taking our expectations and turning them on their heads. Jesus reframes the whole question, not about who is my neighbor, but whose neighbor can I be? Something to think about. Have a great week.